Mental health days and why you should take one. So, in this podcast, I'm gonna tell you guys why you should take a mental health day, when to take a mental health day, and then also what a mental health day should look like. And the reason why I want to do this podcast is because I've personally dealt with burnout. And because I serve people and because I want to make sure I serve them at a high level, I need to make sure that I'm clicking on all cylinders, right? Mentally, emotionally, physically, so that way they can get the best from me so that they can be the best version of themselves in their lives. When you take a mental health day, it's probably the most selfless thing that you can do. And I say that because we have the thought that it's actually very selfish to take a mental health day, to take time for ourselves. And that is the biggest myth. And that's why people right now are struggling with things like stress and overwhelm. By taking a mental health day, you're putting yourself first. And by putting yourself first, you're putting your best foot forward to help those people who need your services. Just think about it. Imagine if you were to go to a surgeon, a doctor, or even a dentist, and let's say they were falling over because they were so sleepy. Let's say they were making errors, right? Maybe they pulled the wrong chart and thought you were Mr. Brown instead of Mr. Green, right? Thinking that you need a root canal when really you just needed a cleaning. That would be terrible. And because of that, I want to make sure that you guys are on all the right cylinders, clicking on all the right cylinders. Because again, the people that you serve, not just from a work perspective, but even in your personal life, they are depending on you to show up. And we need to be able to do that. And we do that by taking a mental health day. Now, I got to be honest. I love what I do as a therapist. And because I love what I do, I need to be mindful of my own mental health and being able to take mental health days. And because of this, I need to make sure that I have a plan put aside to make sure that at any given time, I'm able to access that plan, get what I need, and come back so I can be the best version of myself. But again, because I love what I do, there's a mistake that sometimes I can make where I think, oh man, if I'm not there for my people, if I'm not there for my clients, who will be, right? And sometimes that can be the little paranoia that us as therapists we can have. It's like, oh my God, if I take 2 weeks off, there's a lot that can happen to my clients in those 2 weeks, right? And even just recently, I took about 10 days off because of the holidays. And I didn't think about this too much, but there were some clients that I thought, man, they could really use me right now. And I have to have the faith that I've given them the tools and they'll use the tools. But even me putting in a plan in place for, let's say, if I have a client that's, let's say, suicidal, I need to make sure that I have a plan in place so that if I'm not there, they're okay. And that's me speaking on the extreme level, right? So let's talk about why it's important to have a mental health day. Well, I gave you some reasons already, but I want to give you an even better reason. And one of the best reasons why is because by having a mental health day, you actually prevent having long-term mental health conditions. Some of the long-term mental health conditions that I've seen people have because they're suppressing things and not taking time off is panic attacks. When you have anxiety, right, which is something that we all have, something that's normal, that can weigh on you. But if it's weighing on you chronically, otherwise known as chronic stress disorder or chronic anxiety, what tends to happen is that person can start to have a physical reaction to this anxiety to where they're experiencing short of breath. I've had some clients get very woozy and end up fainting. Some have even thrown up. There's so many different things that can happen because of this anxiety that will lead to a panic attack. And we have this panic attack. One thing that's really tough about these is that people tend to have future panic attacks because they're fearing that they're going to have a panic attack, right? It's like this vicious cycle. And I want to make sure that you guys do not fall victim to that. Another thing that happens with this long-term overwhelm, long-term stress, is that it can actually produce things like addictions. It can produce things like trauma. It can produce things even like depression, right? Things that are long-term. And now you not only have to see a therapist, but also you may find yourself seeing a psychiatrist as well to prescribe you medication to help you to overcome some of these things. And that's a route that we do not have to go down. That's something that we can actually prevent. Something else to go down this path is even the unfortunate adoption of bad habits. So by having all of this stress, I've seen people in very high, let's say, spaces, if you will, high level careers. They find themselves running on E. So what they end up doing is picking up something like Adderall, right? Adderall or other amphetamines, things that speed them up to make them feel like, hey, like they're on top of the moon, even though their body's telling them, hey, we're on ground zero. These are things that can lead to, unfortunately, long-term addictions that, again, then you have to find yourself with a therapist or, let's say, a psychiatrist to help you to get off these things. Now, something else I want to say is that when this happens, right, when you're finding yourself not taking personal health days, when you find yourself not really caring for your body, what tends to happen is that you find yourself depressed because you're not enjoying the fruits of your labor. Now, what I love going over with my clients, if you've ever been a client of mine, you know that I talk about this thing called the 4 domains of life. So these are the 4 windows to your life. You can think of them as like 4 sections, 4 chapters to your life. Now, one chapter is to career and education. And as a young professional, even as a man, as anybody, really, I can say it just like that. But I know as young men, right, middle-aged men as well, we tend to put a lot of emphasis on this part of our life because we're trying to take care of a family. Maybe we're trying to buy a house, like all these things. So as a result, that ends up getting maybe 70% of our time, right? The career and education domain. Now, the other domains are relationships, right? Personal growth, personal health, right? That's another one. And then the last one is leisure time. Because let's face it, even though I love being a therapist, being a coach, I also love going to NBA games. I also love going to museums. And I definitely love going and eating in really nice restaurants in the downtown areas. And that's a shout out to the previous podcast that I just did, right? The Art of Being Rich. So there's so much more to me than my career, than my business. And I need to make sure that I'm enjoying those parts of my life too. And this will re-energize me so that I can go at it even harder when it comes to the career domain of my life. All right. So we want to make sure that you guys are sampling, right? Kind of like when you go to a restaurant, you order a sampler, right? Or a platter. We want to make sure that we're sampling all the different types of our life, all the different domains of our life. Now, there will be times in your life where, hey, one domain is, let's say, very, very much more important than the other domains, right? There's much more of an emphasis. You find yourself spending more time there. And that is totally fine, right? We want to just make sure that we have harmony. All right. I heard someone once say this. I think it was Jeff Bezos, but he says, having balance in your life isn't something that you should strive for. But what you should strive for is harmony. Meaning, if you find yourself putting 50% of your time in the career and education domain, or 70% of your time in your career, right? Career, your education, your business. But if you're still able to put, let's say, 10% to your leisure time, maybe it's 15% to your relationships, and another, whatever the remaining percentage is, to your personal growth, personal health. And if it works for you, right? And when I say works for you, I mean it works for you and your loved ones, then that's okay. You don't have to force it to where each part of your life gets 25%. That may be closer to what we call wishful thinking, if you will. So we want to make sure that we have harmony, not necessarily balance. Now, when should you take a mental health day, and how often should you take a mental health day? Now, I love demystifying myths and beliefs, right? And I'm gonna do that right here. So when and how often? Well, I think sometimes we forget that Saturdays and Sundays can actually be mental health days, and you do not have to take off a day during the week where you're working to have a mental health day. Okay. Now, how is this the case, right? Because we know this to be true, but why isn't it working like that for us? Well, a big reason may be that you're not taking advantage of these days. You're not being intentional with how you plan your weekends. You may even find yourself still working on the weekends. And because of that, it doesn't feel like your weekends are truly yours to relax. Even during the week, I think sometimes we forget that even when we get off work, that time from 5 p.m. to, let's say, 9:30 p.m. or 5 p.m. to 10 p.m., that is still a lot of quality time that you can use to go out to a nice restaurant, go and have a game night, right? Go to a movie, do something at a local park, or even just do something here in your home. Don't think that the weekends are the only time that you can use to actually have, let's say, a mental health day, right? It doesn't have to be set up that way, if you will. Next, when should you take a mental health day, right? Like when should I be like, all right, I know I have my weekends, but I really think I need to take a day off from work. Well, I like to go by the rule of 60%. When I find myself operating below 60%, that's when I tell myself, hey, I need a mental health day. And I think what also helps for me is that I actually love what I do. And because of that, I actually feel energized from seeing my clients, from doing my work. So as a result, the amount of mental health days that I need to take is not that much. Now, if you find yourself working a job that puts a lot of stress on you, or something that I don't think a lot of people talk about, if you don't have boundaries within your career, right, within your job, meaning you find yourself doing the work of other people, you find yourself people pleasing, you find yourself overworking, right, all these different things. And I'm not saying that overworking is bad, but it's, again, context really matters. You would then find yourself needing more mental health days than someone who enjoys their work, right? Someone who does have boundaries around their job. That's something that's very important to remember. Also, I very much so every quarter, I find myself taking, if not 1 day or 2 days, I find myself maybe taking a few days off. Because I live here in South Florida and my family lives in South Carolina, I've personally made it a goal to where once a quarter, I go back and I see my family. And I take advantage of the holidays to do that. So it's not a big stretch for me to do things like this. So I want you guys to also take advantage of those as well, okay? These holidays. And then also something that I want to make sure that I push is that the more often you take a mental health day, the less in duration you actually need a mental health day. So I'll give you an example. If you're using your Saturdays and Sundays the way that it is intended for you to rest, then you may not need to take a week or 2 weeks off in the middle of January or the middle of, let's say, June or October to just recharge. It's because you've been taking care of yourself over the course of the long haul. Life, even your work, but especially life, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and we have to treat it as such. And when you do that, you find yourself needing less in terms of duration when it comes to your mental health days. So maybe you just need a day. Maybe you can actually put in a half day at work. So a lot of people now are moving towards only working Monday through Thursday and they have Fridays off. This is a great way to make sure that your mental health is intact. And then last, what should your mental health day look like? Well, your mental health day should be free of shoulds and musts. It's like, I should go and do this. I should go to the gym. I must go to the gym. And if those things are things that actually give you, let's say, peace, actually recharges you, then do it, right? But one thing that a mental health day should not be, it shouldn't be a day filled with tasks that you feel like chores, right? Because then it's going to feel like another work day. So make sure that your day is free of those things. Next, a mental health day doesn't have to look like this big grand thing, right? It doesn't have to be this big grand thing where I'm going to Rome, if you will, or I'm going to the most expensive restaurant on South Beach or wherever you're at. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Again, in my previous podcast episode, I talk about the art of being rich. And I talk about how me and my wife, we went down to a restaurant in downtown Fort Lauderdale, and it cost us $54 to get breakfast. But because it was in the right context, in the context of it just being us, the context of it being a Tuesday, and we were eating breakfast in a downtown area, right? It was a nice scenery. We were sitting on the street. Because of the right context, it didn't take a lot of money for us to feel fulfilled, for us to feel like we're rich. And it's the same thing with your self-care. If you took $100, if you took $50, right? And then actually it could be free. If you didn't spend anything, but you spent your time in the right context, you will find that the mental health day that you're looking for is very easily accessible. And it will actually fill your cup a lot more than if you had $1,000 to spend that day, but it was in the wrong context. Okay, so again, context, environment, who you're doing it with, so much important, so much more important. And I think a big mistake that I've seen people make, even myself, is that we think that a mental health day should be a day where we do nothing. It's a day where we sit on the couch, we watch Netflix, and we just veg out, right? Kind of like in this vegetative state, if you will. No, that is the biggest mistake, and I've made that mistake. I remember one day feeling so overwhelmed that I was starting to feel pain in my chest. And I actually went to the doctor just to get a checkup. He said, hey, you're fine, right? And side note, I think it's 70% or maybe it's 80% of all doctor's visits are due to some stress-related concern. All right, so just a side note. So I remember thinking, okay, I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed, let me just do nothing. But because I did nothing, I didn't get anything, right? I got nothing, and I still felt overwhelmed. And it wasn't until I went to an event at my church that I started to feel fulfilled. It wasn't until I did something, right? So even though I felt tired, felt overwhelmed, it's because I went out and did something, I actually got the energy that I needed. So again, a mental health day should not be a day where you do nothing, okay? I want you to do something intentional, something purposeful. and that will give you the energy that you're looking for. And with all that being said, I'll have you just ask yourself this one simple question. What does a perfect day look like for you? What does a perfect day look like for you? And I like that question because in a day, there's only so much you can do, right? In a day, you can't go to, let's say, Brazil and come back, right? Jamaica and come back, right? Like, what can you honestly do within 24 hours that will still constitute a perfect day, right? Think about that. Now, once you have that answer, I want you to then write down a list, really write down an itinerary of where you want to do, when you want to do it, right? Even if you need to, budget it out, right? If you said, hey, I have $100 to make a perfect day, what would I then do with that day? Okay. And again, this is something that you can do quarterly. And if you find yourself financially like, I don't even know if I can make that happen, I would tell you, open up a separate bank account. All right. And then from your direct deposit, if you're working a W-2 job, or even if you're working for yourself, you should have automatic setups, transfers, if you will, where a percentage of your check, right, or a certain dollar amount of your check goes to this fund, right, to this bank account, and then you treat this bank account as your self-care bank account, your self-care funds. That way it doesn't feel like it's a big stretch when you're starting to take care of yourself mentally, all right? And I'll even add this. In your self-care bank, feel free to add funds to see a therapist, okay? That right there can constitute a mental health day as well, all right? Seeing a therapist, if you're in church, if you have a religious place that you attend, even seeing them would be a great mental health day, if you will, right? So many different options that you have. So again, in this podcast, I told you why it's important to have a mental health day, what a mental health day should look like, and then how often you should have a mental health day. And all of this is important because of the people that you're serving. You do not want to show up to a doctor's office with a doctor that is so stressed out from the night before that he's messing up your charts, right? That he's giving you the wrong procedures, or he's misdiagnosing you, right? That wouldn't be fun. And I want to make sure that with the work that you do, you're not falling victim to those same mistakes, all right? And not just work stuff, but even in your personal relationships, these people, they're counting on you to be able to show up. And to do that, you have to have a good mental health. So this is Coach Wells, and this is why you should have a mental health day. And thanks for watching. All right, I'll see you later.